America, China, and the Donald Trump effect to push back on the communist quest for global dominance. That's the topic of today's Bold and Blunt, and I'm your host, Cheryl Chumley, giving you a Christian conservative look at today's news, politics, culture, and events. Trump claims Asia tour returned trillions of dollars to U.S. That's a headline from Fox News that came right before his critical meeting with China's Xi. And it was based on Trump's securing of billions of dollars in deals with Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Japan, South Korea, all these trade deals that his administration forged. And if you look at what that does, that's not just good for America. It's not just good economically for America to secure trade deals with these countries and these governments, but it's good for the security and peace and liberty of the world, because the less countries have to rely on or turn to China for their economies, to bolster their economies, in some instances to even bail out their economies, the better it is for governments of the world who aspire to have freedom and democracy and, dare I say, even a constitutional republic like we have here in America, and free trade. It's something that secures the freedom of the world. The less that countries have to do business with communist China and other communist nations, but in particular communist China, the better it is for the freedom of the world. And before I get into more of this, I want to quickly mention, if you like Bold and Blunt, you may get Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network. That's the faith-based news outreach of Pastor Jack Hibbs out in California. His church, his Calvary Chapel Chino Church out in California, puts out an excellent news product, RLN, Real Life Network, and if you go there, you will find an incredible lineup of savvy talent who put forth podcasts and videocasts that look at news from a faith-based perspective. And I'm very happy to say that Bold and Blunt has been part of RLN's lineup for some time. You may also get Bold and Blunt at WashingtonTimes.com, where I would direct you to the bottom of WashingtonTimes.com webpage. Click on the newsletter section and sign up for my newsletter, Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley. You'll get my podcasts as well as all my commentaries delivered right to your email box 3 times a week. If you don't do that, you can also get Bold and Blunt wherever podcasts are available. Just do an internet search on Bold and Blunt or Bold and Blunt with Cheryl Chumley, and it'll pop up everywhere. So you can listen in that way. So let's just run down President Donald Trump's meetings, right? Meetings that he had with these officials and that his staff had with these officials that he says returned trillions of dollars to the United States. He's talking about the trade imbalances that have been course corrected, right? He wrote on Truth Social, bringing back trillions of dollars to USA, a great trip dealing with very smart, talented, and wonderful leaders. This was the day before he was due to meet with President Xi of China in South Korea. And Fox goes on to say, all eyes on Trump because of his fantastic deals, well en route to South Korea. He inked deals with Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Japan, and South Korea. He also worked out, Fox wrote, he also worked out reciprocal trade frameworks with Thailand and Vietnam. The trade agreements with Malaysia and Cambodia eliminated or significantly reduced tariffs on U.S. exports. The White House said that under these agreements, non-tariff barriers will also be addressed and market access for U.S. products will be expanded. While in Malaysia, Fox wrote, Trump was also able to secure billions in investments and a critical minerals deal that the White House says will expand trade and investment. Additionally, in Thailand, Trump landed a critical minerals deal that would promote partnerships between American and Thai companies, the White House said. One more paragraph from the story. In Japan, Trump announced that Tokyo agreed to expand its previous $550 billion investment commitment to the United States. Additionally, he signed a critical minerals agreement and deepened cooperation between the U.S. and Japan to combat illegal drug trafficking. What is there not to like about this flurry of activity that Trump made that culminated with his securing from President Xi in China a promise to resume purchase of soybeans from the United States? Farmers out there must be, farmers out in America, out west here, must be very happy to hear that, right? Because they were a little bit on pins and needles with their soybeans halt to China. And so now China is agreeing to resume purchase of soybeans. And you know what else China is agreeing to do? It's agreeing to put a 1-year moratorium on its announced intent to really crack down on exports of its rare earth minerals. It had this announced policy, it was due to take effect this December, where it would have banned all rare earth mineral exports to other countries who would then use them. These countries would use these rare earth minerals for defense development or certain technology. And China was going to ban any further exports of these products without first giving express permission to that country. So in other words, China would put a stranglehold on the entire world's ability to access its rare earth minerals. And China basically has almost a monopoly on these rare earth minerals. And so the whole world would have been crippled by this. So now China, after talks with Trump, has agreed to put a moratorium of a year on this so-called policy. Not that that's anything that can't come back to bite the world in a year, but at least now it's not going to take effect in December. And so Donald Trump agreed to lower tariffs on China from 57% to 47%. And that whole 100% tariff announcement that Trump made in response to China's ridiculous controls on rare earth minerals announcement, that has gone by the wayside too. So Donald Trump, President Trump, his team is calling this a great success. There are plans for Trump and Xi to meet again in April. So the talks will continue. And in the meanwhile, Senator Chuck Schumer and all the Democrats are coming out and finding ways to criticize President Trump and the successes he has made in forging these trade agreements, forging these economic opportunities with all these countries, with all these other countries, and the success he's seen in reeling back China's intent to spread its communist rot around the world by digging in its economic claws in other countries' governments, by getting other countries to depend on China for its own economic growth. So the Democrats can't stand that President Trump has these successes. Senator Chuck Schumer, for instance, has called Trump's entire Asia trip a total dud. A total dud. Really? Anyway, my guest today, who is an expert in all things China, has much to say about this administration and how this administration is taking on China head on. In particular, how China may have overplayed its hand in recent days, particularly with its threat to strangle the entire world with its rare earth mineral store. So Miles Yu, I want to thank you so much for being on Bold and Blunt. It is so great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me.
So I wanted you on to talk about this great piece that you had in the Washington Times a few days ago. The title is "China Overplays Its Hand with Rare Earth Ultimatum." What's going on there?
Well, rare earth actually is has been much discussed in recent years. That's because rare earth, particularly the heavy uh, rare earth elements, they were critical in making high-end defense and technology innovation. So China had the near monopoly of that. About 80 to 90% of China's mining and refinery of this rare earth materials. The world's 80 to 90% capacities are in China.
Hmm.
So for a long time, like many other things, we have developed this addiction and all China's dependency on China. So right now, China put a nuclear option. They just make the demand to the whole world that any products, industrial product in the world that contain China-sourced uh, rare earth material, even to like 1,000%, right, of this component, must get a pre-approval from Chinese government before you can sell, you can do any kind of business transaction. This is a blocker to the world. That's why the world feel like China put a chokehold on the global market, and President Trump reacted very strongly. And this actually is very illustrative of China's traditional strategy. That's the piece I was writing about.
Yeah, and China's traditional strategy, though, has always been the long game. I mean, they're willing to go 100 years if at a slow roll if it accomplishes their global domination end game in the meanwhile. But this just seems sped up. It just struck me as something that was a little bit out of character for China. Did it strike you that way as well?
Not really. I mean, I am trained as a historian, so I know if you look at the history, there's some kind of continuous video rather than a sort of a static photos, and then you will know that this fits perfectly well with the Chinese traditional strategy, which is this: China basically wants to create a global dependency on trade and technology. And they have done this for a long time. In the 1990s, the Chinese Supreme Leader Deng Xiaoping was talking about rare earth as the ultimate weapon against the West. So at the time, nobody paid any attention to what he was talking about, and nobody even knew what he meant by that.
Hmm.
Now, in 2010, China pulled a trigger on Japan because there was some kind of a maritime dispute at the time. So China basically banned all exports of rare earth materials to Japan, and which basically strangled the Japanese automobile industry in particular. And Japanese was shocked, and they took the China to WTO for arbitration. China lost that, so they were forced to some like years later, 5 years later, to cancel the embargo. But still, this should be a lesson to the West, and we didn't pay enough attention. So this is the time when China realized, in order to sort of destroy American economy, to destroy America's high-tech, particularly defense industries, they must seal all loopholes in the world, in the global system, to basically strangle Americans' economy to death.
How many more lessons do we need before we get this in the West? Because it seemed like, it was just a few years ago when Newt Gingrich was in charge of the House. Now we're going back a couple decades, but the idea even from Republicans was that if we work with China to bring a freer market to their economy, then they would move more towards Western principles, and that never happened. How many more warnings do we need before we realize the threat China is?
Well, we have plenty of warnings. The United States is very good at the response to catastrophes. Either after Pearl Harbor, after 9/11, we're doing a pretty good job.
Right.
But all this good job should have been done before the warnings came, before the catastrophe arrived. So this is something that I think that Trump's first term, in which he actually served, was a wake-up call. And I think that it was Trump's first term that changed the entire wrong and dangerous trajectory of hoping China to become free and more democratic. So that's basically the wrong track since the Richard Nixon. And we hope that, yes, we realized China at the time, 1971, was a non-market economy, and China was a communist country. But with the gospel of a free market, with the gospel of democracy, we could convince China to change. So by embracing China, absorbing China into the global free trade system, hopefully we will force China gradually to change to more like us. Now, the highlight of that, the climax of this tragedy came around 2000. In 2000, President Clinton made a very important speech at the Brookings Institution, one of the liberal think tanks in Washington, D.C., in which he basically urged the U.S. Congress to pass what called the PNTR, Permanent so most favored trade status for China.
Yes.
And by virtue of that, of course, U.S. was pushing, President Clinton was pushing for China's membership at the WTO, World Trade Organization. So if you read President Clinton's speech at the Brookings, it reads today like America's economic suicide note. It was absolutely amazing. Everything he said, that all the hope in China would be more democratic, more be a member, sort of abiding, rule-abiding member of the global trading system is all gone. He also said that we can now only export the products made in America to China, not American jobs. And so that absolutely it's really insane. So it was Trump's first term that realized all the shenanigans, and basically we changed that. China no longer is reformable. Number two, China does have a global ambition for dominance. And that's why during Trump's first term, we designate China as America's number one national threat. Bar none. That definition, that declaration has not changed.
Very, very good insights going back to Clinton when he delivered those remarks. I actually remember that, the trade status. And I remember it was under Bill Clinton that it was Chinese nationals stole much of our technology. And that was when that security threat came to light. Looking at Donald Trump now, what is he doing right with China? What is he doing wrong?
Well, just to add what you said, and before I answer the question directly, it was not just Clinton, because George W. Bush did the same thing. They hope that China will become a part of the normal nation, part of sort of an ordinary international order. That basically, so both parties were not immune to this China fantasy. Now, back to your question, what Trump has done. Donald Trump is very unique in the sense that he is probably the only American president who is not a career politician, and he is a businessman. The only exception, sort of remotely similar to Donald Trump, probably is Herbert Hoover. In 1928, he won the election for president because Hoover was a businessman. He's a mining engineer type. But Donald Trump is very different. So he brings to Washington something that's a very different, unique perspective. He emphasizes on end result, on bottom line, and on first principle. So when the China case, he realized, United States as a superpower faces national security threats by the hundreds each day. But then the key is you have to prioritize that. So setting the priority list is Donald Trump's very strong virtue. So he basically puts China on top, and then Russia, Iran, North Korea, you let it go down the list, right? That happened in the first term. Second term, he basically is free from all the domestic animosity toward him, Russia, and also COVID and the inexperience in choosing cabinet, choosing sort of his government appointees. So second time, he's very different. He's more focused on China. And he began to look at two things. Number one, I think he did a very good in sort of stabilizing China while competing fiercely with China, negotiating with China, and by putting China on a hotspot and imposing enormous tariff on China. Secondly, he also wants to strengthen America's domestic capabilities, particularly political divisiveness, and also, I mean, people might not agree with me, but that's true when it comes to China, because the country is so divided on many things, but on China policy is almost like a unanimous, both parties across the aisle. He wants to consolidate that. Secondly, he wants to strengthen America's manufacturing base. And because one of the biggest problems that China has got us is to steal America's manufacturing capabilities. We ship all the jobs, shipbuilding is one thing, and many other things too. So he wants to self-strengthen it. That's one thing. So on the global stage, he basically tried to corner China by getting rid of all the other strategic distractions, including war in Ukraine and including the turmoil in the Middle East, so that America could focus single-handedly on this biggest adversary and most formidable adversary, that's Chinese Communist Party. So I think overall, he's doing all right. Now, there is also, of course, the different and unique negotiation skills. President Trump, you keep hearing say, Xi Jinping is a good friend of mine, and we'll get along very well. That's basically the way of him to calming down the adversary to prevent unnecessary premature kinetic fight. So that's the very important leadership quality. I think that's the thing. On the other hand, he really squeezed the opportunist countries very hard, that basically taking advantage of tensions between U.S. and China and doing business with China, doing business with the United States on China's behalf, like in Mexico, like Canada. These two countries are neighbors, but they're using this USMCA tariff-free privilege to allow China to set up factories in their countries, in Mexico and in Canada, and to dump a lot of Chinese-made in Mexico and in Canada goods to dump in the United States. That's one reason why there's a 25 tariff on Mexico and Canada. But they had no choice, because the USMCA's fundamental principle was the indigenization, regionalization of supply chain in North America. So China got in, and that's basically the problem. And of course, he levied heavy tariffs on all the countries that basically transship Chinese goods to the America. And those countries include Cambodia, Malaysia, and Vietnam. And so that's basically is good. I think he's doing pretty well in those grounds. There are some things he could have done better, but again, that's not the main focus of this broadcast.
What specifically is he doing? I understand what you were saying about the need for the tariffs on Mexico and Canada, because they're sort of taking China's products and using them, and China is being allowed to sidestep its tariffs by going through those countries with its products. But what is Trump doing specific to China's inroads in Africa?
Well, China's inroads in Africa is very telling, because Africa for China is resources.
Mm-hmm.
Africa for China, and most importantly, is an international voting bloc. China basically, there's 54 countries in Africa. China can count on 51, 52 of them, diehard China votes. At the United Nations and World Health Organization, WHO, everywhere, China have that. Once you have that kind of a voting bloc, China is invincible in many international forums. So that's basically important. Now, China, of course, has marched into Africa to take over some of the very important strategic and national assets of these countries. Basically, China provides very cheap loans to many countries, indebted them. The terms of the loans are very tricky and very toxic. For example, normal loans provided to those developing countries, like in African countries, from say World Bank or IMF, all from the United States, is normally about 30-year term. And then you have about 5-6 years of grace period. And the interest rate is about 4.5. China's loan is about 4.5 interest rate. However, the term of the loan is normally 10 years. And also, the grace period is about 10 to 12 months. So the likelihood for this country to default on those loans is much, much higher.
Right.
So that means that China can basically, say you default on the loans, we're going to take over your collaterals. Those definitely is the ports and the railways, and China can take a lot of things. So this is basically a debt trap. If you look at the countries in Africa, the countries that have most Chinese loans, deeply indebted to China, were most dangerous, and they were very politically unstable as well. Angola, for example, and Mozambique, right? Those countries owe China a lot of money, and Kenya too. So that's why. And another thing is, I mentioned about the political instability, because whenever you have a Chinese Belt and Road initiative in those countries, you have a Chinese dominance gradually built up. So at the expense of indigenous people, their business networks were destroyed, their mom and pop shops were shut down. So you have an enormous resentment against China in those countries. So usually you have sometimes mass riots against Chinese shops, Chinese companies. In Nigeria, for example, the chief executives were ordered to kick out, and the government confiscated Chinese state assets. And in Kenya, they have basically a lot of riots against Chinese nationals over there. And also, every major election in those deeply indebted sort of countries friendly to China, the number one election issue was always related with China. Should we do more with China or should we do less? So this is basically created enormous political instability. That's why China as a whole is a very toxic factor in African politics. So people are gradually waking up to that reality. Unfortunately, for many countries, it's too late.
You are a wealth of information. This is fascinating. Aside from the Washington Times, with your recent piece, China Overplays Its Hand with Rare Earth Ultimatum, where else can people find your work, Miles?
Well, actually, Cheryl, I hate to bring it up, but I'm actually a regular Washington Times columnist. So every other week, I read a column called The Red Horizon. So just check it out. And in addition to that, and I also, I'm affiliated with several think tanks. Most obviously with the Hudson Institute. I run a China Center there, and also visiting fellow at Hoover Institution. In addition to that, those are my side hustles. My main job, full-time job, is I'm a full-time professor at the United States Naval Academy in Annapolis.
Very, very fascinating discussion. Thank you so much for your time, especially how busy you are. I really appreciate it.
Well, I enjoy it. Thank you very much.
And that's another Bold and Blunt. Remember, if you like Bold and Blunt, you make up Bold and Blunt at edify.app, at Real Life Network, at WashingtonTimes.com, and of course, wherever podcasts are available. Tune in next time. In the meanwhile, don't forget, stay blunt, stay bold.